film about? What's it really about? What genre does it hit? What is really being said? What's really being seen? That's what you're talking about.
Hello and welcome to the Intermission Podcast, a podcast about pop culture, hosted by Nitin and Dodi. You might have noticed that Nitin is not on the call today. He was unavailable, but we've got a special guest today, Ronak Gupta, a friend of mine. Ronak, say hi.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be on this podcast.
Thank you. Ronak's a friend. We've bonded over our love of movies and the specific movie franchise that we're going to talk about today. I'll tell you a little bit more about Ronak. Ronak has a blog of his own where he does a lot of wonderful writing. We'll plug that towards the end. Ronak and I have met on a quiz group and we've been quizzing for quite some time now, I think a few months at least.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So looking forward to this conversation, Ronak. And let's get started. So today's episode is going to be about Dune. Dune 2 has just come out, Denis Villeneuve. One of the, I would say, truly authored filmmakers of our time, of modern times especially. And we just wanted to talk about Dune, Dune 2, the whole franchise, and a little bit about Denis himself. So let's start with some quick thoughts. Ronak, what do you think about Dune 2?
Yeah, I watched it yesterday. Pretty good laser projection. I'm not sure if it was like the biggest max, but it was a good screen. And yeah, it was a really nice movie. I felt that I was quite engrossed throughout, so I really liked it. But I didn't love it, and I know that sounds like a very minority opinion with the amount of praise Dune has been getting. But I basically loved it as much as I love Dune, which is not all that much compared to other Denis movies. So yeah, like a one-line thing would be like it's a great movie. Obviously, it's excellent, but well, it didn't move me. Like that's the thing. That's the bottom line, I guess.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Speaking for myself, I really enjoyed it. I did feel it was a little, while it's definitely bigger and grander than the first Dune, it is, I think in terms of storytelling, it's a little less interesting, and we'll get into why. But overall, a great experience in the theater, and of course, Denis is a master of keeping you fully engrossed and sound and everything that's happening on the screen. I think among the finest that we have, and I really enjoyed it. I in fact watched it twice already,
Oh wow.
and I've been doing the. Here we go. I've been doing this. Oh, that's much longer than I
Yeah.
remember it. Before we get into Dune 2, let's talk a little bit about Denis. Tell me about your experience of Denis. I know you're a
Yeah.
huge fan, so
It's a
how
bit of
did
a
you get to
joke.
know him
Yeah,
and what is it that you like about his
yeah,
style?
it's a bit of a joke amongst us quizzing people now. I think everyone knows that any quiz of mine, whether it's science or anything, will have a question on Denis Villeneuve. I don't know where that started, I guess, but yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan. In fact, I'm such a big fan that so Denis Villeneuve is a French Canadian director, and I've lived in both of those countries. So that's how big a fan I am of Denis Villeneuve. And as
Following
Naren
the bus.
rightly, yeah, all in past, yeah. As Naren rightly put it, I think he's one of the few authors working, and that too on a very large canvas compared to a lot of the other authors. Like you can compare it to Ari Aster and a bunch of these people who have a very unique vision. But
Yeah.
of course, Denny works with the bigger studios and a bigger canvas. And I don't know if this is shots fired, but I call him the better Nolan. But yeah. So yeah, so
I,
I think
I
he's been
100% agree.
yeah, I think he's been making movies for maybe a decade and a half now. One of the first breakout movies of his, starting with Incendies, which is actually one of his movies I haven't seen. And I think Enemy was his first English language film. Definitely the first kind of more popular English language film. And after which he obviously made Prisoners and then Sicario, Arrival, Blade Runner, the sequel, which was beautiful but didn't do really well. And then, of course, Dune and Dune 2. So he's been kind of gradually increasing in scope and in budget, which is really good news because he's really good at doing it. And yeah, like he's probably made my favorite all-time science fiction film, which is Arrival. And yeah, I'm a big fan of how he deals with really complicated subjects, but in a way that feels tangible and not pandering to the audience. And of course, visually he's fantastic. We'll delve into that a bit later, but that's pretty much the brief about Denis Villeneuve. I think all this
Yeah.
fandom, at least I can pronounce his name nicely instead of Denis Villeneuve, I guess, but I can also spell it now, so that's good.
For me, Denny is, like I said earlier, he's a master of the visual sense. I think you got it right when you said he's the better Nolan. I think there's few people who do this kind of epic storytelling, right? After Cameron,
Right.
there's Nolan who's been trying to do this, and then there's Denny. People who are so committed to the big screen experience and making it something that is totally worthwhile to trek all the way to a cinema, to a big screen to watch and to immerse yourself as well. One of the big things I really enjoy about Denny is the sound, and we can talk about that a little bit more. But he really gets you like in there.
Yeah,
There's a whole atmosphere that's happening, right? It's not just the visual, it's not just the story, it's this entire experience, and he's very particular about that, and
yeah,
you can feel it in all of his movies.
yeah. Fantastic soundtracks, I think. Starting from,
Yeah,
I remember Prisoners being great, and obviously Arrival had, I think the Icelandic composer who passed away, Johan
yeah.
Johansson, if I'm not mistaken. And then of course his work with
And that
Zimmer.
Max Richter number as well, no?
Oh
The
yeah,
main theme, the Max,
yeah, on the Nature of Daylight, which is a profound piece of music.
yeah, on the nature of daylight.
And then
Yeah.
of course his
Now I wasn't just
collaborations with
talking about
Hans Zimmer.
this. Yeah. Now, I wasn't just talking about the music, I was talking about the sound
Sound.
design itself. Sound that he uses for storytelling. And I have a few examples that I want to talk about later, but I feel like
Right.
he takes care of all this. And to be fair, so does Nolan, so does everyone. I think, and we can maybe get into this, I
Yeah.
think that the reason I feel he's a better Nolan, he's got a better grasp on storytelling. It's
Mhm.
not about and the visual, obviously, whatever, but Nolan also great with the visual. I think the main thing that I enjoy about Denny is that much easier to get into his storytelling. He takes a lot more care for the characters
Right.
as well as the visuals, and I feel that Nolan kind of gets carried away with the trick of it and not in the character of it, if
Yeah,
that makes sense.
that's I think a really apt observation. I mean, I think this recent interview clip that's going around of Villeneuve where he's like, I don't care about dialogue, which is really funny to me because I feel like what he does really much better than Nolan, in fact, is dialogue and no exposition. So if you look at Nolan's
Yeah,
dialogues in movies, they're often very clunky, trying to explain something. They're not very
yeah,
organic.
yeah,
But I think Villeneuve, I
yeah,
mean, obviously he's not writing it, a lot of it himself. But my point is the way he structures movies, they don't come across as he's explaining something. So I feel like probably his biggest strength in terms of making big cinema is he doesn't lose the intimacy. And the best example of that, I think, is Arrival, where like you're always invested in the central conceit of the movie, which is you're staying with Amy Adams' character, even though it's like this whole first contact thing.
yeah,
It could become this very steely kind of not very kind of a distant movie, but it never becomes that. And I feel like that's the best demonstration. And well, even Dune's success also is because, I mean, I didn't care much about the characters, but I could see that there are places that people, at least on social media, have been raving about how much they care about Chani, which is Zendaya's
yeah,
character, and
yeah,
things like that. So I feel like that is his real strength, like in conserving that aspect of movie making while obviously making these gorgeous, large
yeah.
scale, epic visuals and sound. Yeah.
And I think that also adds into the way he directs actors. Again, just to not to make this a Nolan bashing pod. I mean, the
Yeah,
man literally just won the
that's
Best
true.
Director,
Yeah.
Best Picture,
Yeah.
and Best Actor and Best Supporting Actor Oscars. Uh, but Nolan's performances also aren't very great, and I think that comes down to the way he directs. I guess the way he writes the characters. They're there to serve a plot function. They are
Yeah, of
not
course.
really there to have an arc of their own. Their arc is only defined by what's happening inside the Inception or inside the Interstellar, and even when he does do character stuff like Matthew McConaughey wanting to be with his daughter in Interstellar,
Right.
it still feels like okay, we need the bookshelf and whatever else to work. So chalo, let's like invest some more acting firepower here, and Matthew McConaughey must have like pushed for a little bit more character. But like even saying that Chani is powerful in Dune, a lot of that comes down to the way it's directed, and of course, Chani, I mean, Zendaya being a good actress as well. I think she manages to hold her own. But yeah, and I agree with you. Even for me, Arrival is one of my favorites. It's a good question. What would be my second favorite? Weirdly enough, not Blade Runner 2049.
Fair
I need
enough.
to rewatch it multiple times.
Yeah, yeah.
I weirdly really enjoy Sicario.
Oh, it's beautiful. Sicario is fantastic, man. It's like
Yeah,
a you could it just seems like a basic, drug bust kind of criminal movie, but it's
yeah,
so
yeah,
much more than that. I mean, it's so
yeah,
brilliant. Uh, I mean, I can go on. I think I can talk about an hour about how brilliant the cinematography is in Sicario itself. It's just great.
yeah, yeah.
And it's sort of a nice segue to what I really want to talk about how good the cinematography is in his movies. I mean, starting with at least Prisoners was the first time I noticed it, and of course, it's the goat of cinematographers, Roger Deakins,
Yeah.
and then who obviously won his Oscar doing Blade Runner 2049, and he also worked with him on Sicario. So you can, and it's a great partnership. It's almost as good as the partnership Deakins has with the Coen brothers, which is so
Yeah.
singular and so unique, and everyone really loves it. And I feel like people don't talk much about Villeneuve and Deakins, but that's a
Yeah.
fantastic collaboration as well. And in fact, the hallmark of a good filmmaker is that he can adapt to different material and work with different DOPs. So the
Yeah.
last two Dune movies are done with Greg
Yeah.
Fraser, if I'm not mistaken.
Greg Fraser. Yeah.
Yeah,
Greg
and
Fraser.
actually
Greg
in
Fraser
Arrival,
won.
yeah, I won both
Greg
the
Fraser
Oscars.
won for Dune.
Yeah, I mean, I said both the Oscars because he probably will it next year as well. Sorry
Yeah.
for the Freudian slip, but and in fact for Arrival he works with an entirely different DOP. I think Bradford Young, which is like
Bradford
he's
Young.
not
Yeah.
he hasn't worked
Bradford
as
Young is
much.
an indie. By the way, Bradford Young is an indie
I know,
DOP.
yeah.
He's not worked on big budget stuff.
Yeah. I think plays Beyond the Pines,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken, right? Like Bradford Young was, yeah,
Maybe I don't know which
yeah,
ones, but I know he's not a blockbuster
yeah.
guy. He's
So this is not.
more.
I mean, I geek out a lot about like cinematography in most movies, and for me, Villeneuve's entry point was like, oh my god, this is like so deliberate and so beautifully done. I mean, in Prisoners, you feel the tension. Like he's zooming. He talks about his favorite shot from Prisoners, and he's just zooming in into a tree, and I'm like, I felt that. I felt the
Yeah,
tension when you're zooming into a tree. So he really gets those minor things that make the movie making experience so much more than the plot. He's fantastic at that.
yeah. All right, so let's get into Dune a little bit.
Amazing.
Dreams,
Yeah.
messages from the deep. I like how he uses that even before the logos and all come. It's like the start of the movie is
Yeah.
that, and then Warner Brothers logo and everything is legendary, whatever else. But okay, let's start with this. Have you read the books? I have not. So if you've read the books, you
So
can give me a little bit of flavor from
yeah,
there, and then
that's
we
a
can.
good. I mean, I have read the Dune, just Dune, but it's been a while actually. I remember it being a very dense read. I mean, it's always like the best sci-fi book of all time in all of those lists. Dune is pretty much always number one. So I was like, okay, I should check it out, and I remember really liking it. Like I said, the world building is quite dense, and I think it was like pre 1960 around 1960s. So
Yeah. So,
yeah, so I thought, I mean, of course, all these kind of stories is a classic kind of good triumphs over evil, the classic Star Wars arc, which is funny because Star Wars came after Dune, but yeah,
yeah.
uh, yeah. So I have read the books, and I think the books are obviously great, but unfortunately, I haven't read it recently enough to comment on
Mhm.
how close the adaptation is.
Ah,
Um, but before we start talking about Dune One, I have a small anecdote to share. So
ah.
back before Dune One was much before Dune One was made, I think the rights were bought, and there used to be, I mean, there is a newspaper called not newspaper, but a digital thing called Store, and they commissioned me to write an article about who might make the Dune adaptation. And my
Oh.
prediction was Denis Villeneuve, and just that week it was announced that Denis Villeneuve is indeed making Dune, and I was like, I
Oh.
was so as Naren put it, Dune is first of what we hope is going to be a trilogy, and of course, like obviously as is evident, directed by Denis Villeneuve and of Warner Brothers, kind of a large scale production. I was pleasantly surprised that they gave him all that money after Blade Runner 2049 and did not do well at all. But it's a
Yeah.
pleasant surprise. So of course, and Dune One released to absolute critical acclaim, and a lot of people went and actually watched it in the theaters because it is really that kind of a movie which you
Yeah.
cannot watch it on a small screen. And it chronicles the story of basically a young not an upstart, but a young prince called Paul, who then is on a journey of self-discovery, as well as you learn a lot more about the Dune world. I think Naren would probably talk a little more about what happens in Dune, but yeah, that's pretty much what Dune is. It's a story of a guy called Paul. It doesn't sound like much, but it is.
Okay. So for me, I ended up actually, unfortunately, having to watch it on the small screen. I had no other access at that point in time. I don't even think it had released in Bangalore. I don't know if it
Okay.
released in India at all. But yeah, we were all cooped up and, the COVID times, so were not stepping out. So I had to make do with the small screen version of it, and genuinely hoping for cinemas here in Portugal to show part one before part two, but they did not. So that's still one of the things that I'm missing.
Oh,
But even on the small screen, I could tell all the amazing stuff that was happening and wishing that I could see this more on the big screen. So yeah, like you said, the story is basically um, in the future. I think I even forget what year it is. This is a
I think
good.
100 years into the future. I'm not sure. Probably more.
No, it's more. It's more.
It's
It's
more.
more.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
it's a 400, 500, I think, or maybe even more.
I mean, there are
But
still bagpipes, so it's probably not that long.
yeah, not that old also.
Yeah.
Not that much into the future. And we've humans, they are humans after all. Humans have colonized other planets. And the main thing that allows for intergalactic travel is this particular mineral called spice, sought after and most expensive substance in the galaxy. And it's really about the control of that substance, right? Whoever gets to control that effectively controls, has power in the universe. And so we have our young Paul Atreides, played by Timothy Chalamet, his father, played by Oscar Isaac, I guess their general or whatever, played by
Josh Brolin.
Josh Brolin, his friend slash trainer slash whatever, also the main warrior, played by Jason Momoa, his mother, Lady Jessica, the concubine of the king. It's a jam-packed cast, right? I mean, I remember when Dune was first announced and they unveiled that cast, I was like, what is this? Like, when will it stop? They just kept like
Yeah.
throwing names. Zendaya is there,
Yeah.
Javier Bardem is there, he's one of
Yeah.
the spice. There's just like Stellan Skarsgård is there.
Yeah.
Everybody's in this movie. Like, okay, fine. Yeah, this is
It's
like,
like a sci-fi
he's
Wes
really
Anderson film. Sci-fi Wes Anderson film, actually.
correct. Sci-fi Wes Anderson is a great way to put it. He's just basically called everyone and said, Ajao, we have to do this. And I think Dune is also that kind of story that really requires that many formidable people to be able to convey an idea without having to do a lot of exposition, right? Coming back to the idea of exposition. If these were unknown actors, you would still need to even set up their persona or whatever else. But here you know what Jason Momoa is going to be, a brash, strong,
Yeah.
slightly cocky guy. Like everybody's also being cast very well within the spaces that they are. So I
Yeah.
think that that's something it does well. And yeah, to complete the earlier thought, no, I have not read the books, so I don't know anything beyond the little bits that I see in connection with the movies.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's Dune 1. But for me, I think what I really enjoyed about Dune 1, and especially in contrast to Dune 2, what I really enjoyed about Dune 1 was the exposition. And we've spoken about this before. Telling your story without having to get into straightforward exposition, right? And I think for me, the best example of that, we were talking about what's his name? Jason Momoa's Duncan Idaho. What are these names, by the way?
Amazing name, though. I love it. It's
Fantastic.
my favorite name in the Dune universe. Duncan, I don't.
Yeah, yeah. So his Duncan Idaho and Paul. Now, clearly, they have a very close relationship or whatever. Like, but we don't hear any of this. He grew up like a brother to me, or you know, he's taken care of me since I was little. They are closer in age, clearly, than let's say a Josh Brolin or whatever,
Yeah.
who's more of a father figure. But Jason Momoa is more of an elder brother figure, but it's never said in words. And if you see the way they interact, everything is just said there. Clearly, they've grown up together. Like I can already see the backstory of them playing, and as whatever, even if they have a 5 year age gap, he's been the bigger brother to uh, Paul Atreides, right? And for me, the scene that I always come back to is when they first land on the Spice Planet. Uh,
Arrakis.
Jason Momoa comes back from a mission and he goes, yeah, on Arrakis, and he goes running to Jason Momoa. Jason Momoa picks him up in a bear hug, and then, like, literally like a child, he swings him around.
Yeah.
It's a further shot, so you can't really see it, but you can see him just picking up. And Paul Atreides is supposed to be a hero, he's supposed to be a messiah, he's supposed to be like this. And somebody is just picking him up like a child. But it says everything about their relationship in that one shot without having to say, you know, when I was a kid, you and I sat together and we played here, and all of
Yeah.
that overly
Yeah,
burdened
it
exposition.
it humanizes both of them, right? It also humanizes
Yeah.
the hero, and it also humanizes Duncan Idaho's character, who I can't help but think. Do you think his favorite food is a potato? Sorry for that terrible. But
Yes.
anyways, I just had to get that out of my system. It was just
Yeah.
irritating.
Fair enough.
But
But
yeah,
yeah, so
that's a great point. Yeah, I love how you picked that one scene, but it says so much about so much of the dynamics. Like it's just that it's
yeah,
just 30 seconds. It's so economical, but so effective.
yeah. So on the exposition, the fact that he's able to do a lot visually, and even if you look at the action scenes, right? If you go to the first mine, what are those? Miner, the big tank that has to mine the stuff.
Yeah,
They don't do a lot of explanation. They just like get there, and as they are, uh, as they get into that whole sequence where a sandworm is coming towards the, we have to introduce the sandworms as well, but uh, our mining people are in trouble, and Oscar Isaac and a bunch of others are in a helicopter, an ornithopter. We talked
on
about that
something.
as well. I
Yeah,
think we'll be doing a lot more exposition than we needed to do.
that he needed to do
Uh,
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah. But that one sequence shows you everything about how the ornithopter works, shows you about how the sandworms work to some extent, at least in terms of how ferocious they can be, shows you how the mining works itself,
and how Arrakis
number of
is such
people.
a crazy planet, like such a harsh condition.
Yes, harsh conditions, everything comes into play in one shot. He is really good at that, right? Anybody else would have spent, sorry, Nolan would have spent like another 10 minutes earlier in the movie describing how the mining works, describing how the ornithopter works, this, that,
Yeah,
everything to get to that point.
yeah, yeah.
Then he's just like, screwed, let's just go there and we'll figure it out as it's happening. We'll say the things, just enough of the things that are required for you to understand what's going on. You don't need a lot more than that.
Yeah, I think in some ways he trusts the intelligence of the audience a lot more, right? And also,
Yes.
he doesn't take the audience's suspension of disbelief for granted. So one of the
Yeah.
things like you spoke so well about how he doesn't do exposition, and that's a huge strength of him as a filmmaker, and hence him in Dune as well, and strength of Dune as well. But for me, I think like we can talk about visual effects for a long time, but I think his sense of scale, which is just something you need for a movie like Dune, right? Because it's a intergalactical, multiple
Yeah.
worlds, big, huge, massive ships. And that's a difficult thing to show. You can be lazy and just, show some massive thing with a tiny person. But the way he does it, like for me, the most memorable scene was this kind of a silhouette scene of a spaceship and the Bene Gesserit, who are these kind of mysterious, religious, kind of very powerful, occult type women walking
Mhm.
out. And it's just like a line of these, and it's just like very sparsely lit, but it just
Yeah.
conveys this very eerie atmosphere. It tells you a little bit about the Bene Gesserit, that they're not, the good characters or whatever. It tells you about
Yeah.
the size of the whole thing. It's just a masterclass in how to convey so much with just scale and simple, but obviously
Yeah.
not simple, but on screen it looks so simple and
Yeah.
effective.
Yeah. So I rewatched Dune before I went into Dune 2, Dune Part 2, and I realized that there's not a whole lot of, like we're also saying exposition, but leaving exposition aside, there's not a whole lot of explanation for what the Bene Gesserit do and
Yeah,
anything else. Like he just tells you enough to move you forward to the next. So he's more interested in the emotional storytelling
right,
than in the setting the rules or whatever. He's like, you figured this out, it's fine. Like you said, allowing the audience to also think for themselves, not dumbing it down for them, not overly explaining. Like she just lands up. They never actually have this full set of dialogue. The Bene
yeah,
Gesserit are this sisterhood who do this and who have
yeah,
these powers. Everything is just shown. You've already seen that Lady Jessica has the voice, which,
exactly.
by the way, that glass water scene with the voice is amazing. But I realized when I finished the whole thing, if I had to like sit and start describing, there are a lot of things that haven't been said in the movie that I'm filling in the gaps
Yeah,
for.
that's
I'm
the
filling
point.
it in not as a like not that I'm making it up or whatever, but he's given me A and C, and logically they must be step B in the middle.
Yeah,
What I realize is he's filling in the emotional truth and getting you to go from A to C to E without having to do the tedious steps of each one of those things and having like a very concrete explanation for everything that's happening.
right.
He's just like, it's okay, you'll figure it out. Let's just keep moving. Let's keep the pace going. And which, by the way, is a great thing in Dune. The first one, the pace is just non-stop,
Relentless. Yeah, yeah. I,
relentless.
I I think it'll be a good thing to, before we start name dropping things and not explaining what happens. maybe I can just quickly recap in 2 minutes what exactly is
Yeah,
Dune 1 and what happens. So
sure.
as Naren said,
Yes, yes, yes.
Paul is the prince of the Atreides family who was sent by the emperor to this planet called Arrakis, right? And Arrakis is this desert planet, completely uninhabitable, but it's a very critically important planet in the ecosystem because it has this thing called the spice, which is mined in the depths of Arrakis, and obviously the sandworms, which are these huge. Obviously, they look like worms and they live in the sand, so they're called sandworms. But they are these massive, powerful creatures, but are also important in kind of producing and taking care of spice. Basically, they're really critical to the whole Arrakis ecosystem, right? So that's what we see. We see these guys have been transported from their really lush green, all sorts of water planets, suddenly to
Yeah,
this place called Arrakis. And you have a foreboding sense of dread already because Villeneuve obviously lays it that way. And you know something bad is going to happen because that's the three-act structure of conflict. There has to
yeah,
be conflict, right? And yeah, well, it does because it turns out the emperor was in the cahoots with uh, this whole guys called the Harkonnens, who are the sort of more black and white villains, literally black and white too. I will not
literally
go on
black and
there.
white. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And the Harkonnens are in cahoots with the emperor, and they have made a deal with some of the emperor's sort of the mercenaries called the Sadukas, which
Yeah,
Naren played the very foreboding chant of. And these guys come and they completely wipe out the entire Atreides family in a very sort of blitzkrieg kind of surprise attack in Arrakis, which is just brilliantly filmed, by the way. You should check it out. And well, young Paul survives, and a couple of others survive too. And that's where the story sort of moves forward. Paul discovers that there are these people called the freemen who live in the sand, who are kind of adapted over many years to kind of live efficiently in the sand, and he hangs out with them, and that's what we know till the end of Dune One. He's just getting assimilated with the Freemen, and that's where we end Dune One. So
yeah.
that's pretty much the gist of how
Yeah.
Dune One goes.
And and the only other thing I would add to that is Paul keeps getting these visions, right? He's kind of seeing the future. And if you go back to Dune, by the way, some of those premonitions that he has will come all the way back in Dune 3 or
In
whatever
what
it's going to
way?
be called when it comes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll see them there. And yeah, so he has these visions which seem almost like two versions of the future. And but as he explains, they're not necessarily exactly what will happen, but things kind of happen that way. And he sees that he becomes this big warrior. He sees that he becomes this big leader, and there's a whole massive army of followers that he has who believe in him, and he leads them all to a holy war. So he's very conflicted by these visions. He knows something is going to happen, but he doesn't know exactly what. And there's a lot more lore around his mother, Lady Jessica, and the Bene Gesserit, and they are trying to crossbreed people and get to the most powerful Kwisatz Haderach, whatever. We can leave that aside. We don't need all that to even get into the story. Like Kwisatz
Yeah.
Haderach are always fine. It's like garnish on top of this existing story. But mainly, Paul knows that at some point he's going to have to lead this entire revolt or holy war against the rest of the galaxy. That last bit again. So let's talk a little bit about the real world implications of Dune, and I think we'll have to go into more of this when we talk about Dune 2. It's all very thinly veiled. Spices, of course, oil.
Yeah.
The Fremen are Arabs or Bedouins, and they're modeled after that. Even if I'm not wrong, the language uses a lot of those sounds and words from Arabic and neighboring languages. And it's basically a white imperialist, white savior kind of story. And we'll hold it at white savior now before we get into more of it later. But Herbert is trying to tell this story of uh, oppression and trying to go after a particular resource, and how that affects everything that happens around, and how innocent people or regular people are caught up and somebody else rules over them and all of that, right? So he's in that zone. And I think it took some time for people to realize what really he was trying to say, and that probably comes to better in Dune 2 and 3. What do you think about that? Do you have any specific thoughts around
Yeah, I think
these?
Dune was, yeah, like you said, it's basically a neo-imperialist. It's how imperialism and colonialism happens in today's world, which is via like taking advantage of oppressed people, and obviously uh, getting high up in the whole war about oil and accumulating resources, basically, right? So it's this whole neo-imperialistic, and like you put it, very thinly veiled. Mostly people who are at least a little bit aware of what the world is would probably be able to figure this out.
Yeah.
Another thing I want to touch upon is I think I remember reading about how Villeneuve said that he wanted it to be a parable about climate change. But somehow I have found that aspect lacking in both the movies. Like I mean, of course, the part of Arrakis being like very dry and things like that, but
Yeah.
we don't get to know why that happened. I think there's a
Yeah.
history about why Arrakis was this way because Arrakis apparently wasn't always that way.
Mm.
But I was kind of hoping that there would be some contemporary stuff that Villeneuve brings
Mm.
to the story of Dune. But I think he's probably realized that it's too much to chew or something. But yeah, so
Yeah.
that's one of the other things that I hoped from the Dune universe. Yeah.
Ah. And the other thing I want to say is we know that Oscar Isaac, as his father, also keeps talking. He knows that he's being put into this position. So there's all of this political machinations at play, and he knows he's being put in a difficult position, and he wants to ensure the House Atreides can survive, and therefore he's trying to make this connection with the Fremen as well, and he's trying to look for what has become a meme at this point.
Desert power.
He's always looking for desert power, right? That just keeps getting repeated, and we don't know what it is until we realize what it is, right? It's on the one hand, it's the sandworms themselves, but I think it's also the still suits and the Fremen warriors who are able to fight in a more vicious way than anybody else can.
Yeah, because they know the environment so much better, right? Like
Yeah,
they
yeah,
understand so much better. Talking about
yeah,
fights, I thought the Dune one, the way bunch of fights. I think there was a scene of, I think there were the Sadukas who were just like descending slowly onto, and that was like
yeah,
just amazing. Like just the fact that the gravity is slowly coming to, the
yeah,
gravity is slowly switching on and off is so brilliant. Of course, it's also used in Dune 2 a lot, but I thought it was
yeah.
so chilling and so amazing to see that the way it was done.
Yeah, it's a bit. I'm still wondering. I want to see some behind the scenes video of how he's done it because it's not fully digital doubles. It's also not fully wire work. The way they're moving, I'm not sure what he's done. He's, as usual, he's done some mix of
Yeah, of course.
real effects with, I mean, practical effects with CGI. He's done something very interesting. And I think here, let's talk a little bit about one of the things I wanted to talk about with his sound is I think he loves this idea of an expanse and an aircraft coming into it of some sort. Okay, I'll just like name two, three scenes in movies and you will know what I'm talking about. If you remember in Sicario, there's this point when they finally leave on their mission. There's
Right.
this huge shot of the whatever desert that they are flying across to go to Mexico, and you can hear drums. Okay, it's like this very urgent
Right.
percussion that's happening. It's like building up the dread and everything. And then the helicopters come into view, and you realize it's not drums, it's the rotors. He's like played with
Oh,
the
nice.
sound of the drums to make it the sound of the rotors. But it's actually rotors that you've been hearing, and they're coming with this ferocity. There three of them come into scene and it drops off. Arrival has the same thing.
Right.
When you first see the
The
what do they
vehicle.
call it? The spaceships,
Yeah.
the spaceships, and Amy Adams is landing there. They also, he's got that scene, and then they come flying into frame, and they have that entire sound. Like it just becomes so overwhelming. He's got that frequency that's just like foreboding and kind of
Yeah.
pushing you into the sound. But even the ornithopter sound, there are a couple of times where that shot is still the desert, and then the first time the ornithopters come in, they fly into that scene, and it starts with this. You're not sure if it's like drums and music or is it like sound from the scene, and it turns out to be sound that's diegetic to the
Diegetic, yeah.
scene of the thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
but
like, it's, I think the world of Foley sound and sound creation is just amazing. I love looking at all these. Like, I think I was seeing something about the Quiet Place and they use some crunch of celery to like denote
yeah,
the monsters walking. It's just epic. And it's such a under appreciated talent because people just don't know about it, right? Like, it's one of those
yeah,
invisible things that people wouldn't realize what goes into it.
yeah,
And this is what I mean when I say that he doesn't take their suspension of disbelief for granted. He knows that these are things people might not consciously know, but it really helps
yeah,
in kind of getting the world right. Because if it's
yeah.
something jarring, you'll be out of it immediately.
You can tell the difference. You pay like just if you just stop for a second and look at a bad scene with bad foley, you'll
Right.
realize, oh, okay, fine, the sound is really like lacking here. But I think we don't tend to think in those ways. It's a very, like you said, invisible art. getting the sound right, and especially when it comes to imaginary sounds like this, where we have no real world analog in any case. You assume that an ornithopter should sound like a chopper, but there are no rotors, it's wings, whatever. So it has to be flapping, not turning,
Yeah, that's true.
etc.,
Yeah.
etc. Dune 1 ends with, like you said, Paul joining the Fremen. He proves himself by having to kill a warrior. A warrior that we've seen in his visions is his guide. So we also start realizing that, like he said, not everything happens exactly the way he sees it, but it's more or less, it's one possible future, it's one possible vision of what's going to happen. And we see that big action scene in one where he fights through all those warriors and comes out at the other end, and the mask opens and it's him. And of course, in Dune 2, we see that that's actually Chani doing all of that.
Yep.
So we haven't also spoken about Zendaya. She has close to zero role beyond being this ethereal presence. He keeps seeing this girl from the Fremen tribe. He doesn't know who she is, but he knows she's very important to his life. They have a lot of close encounters, but there's no dialogue. And she's somebody he meets literally at the end of the movie. And we know now that their mission is going to start. But at this point, and the way Dune 1 is set up, it's clear he's the hero. He's the one who's going to save the world. He's going on a mission. Even though he's afraid of his visions, or he's kind of unsettled by his visions, it's all portrayed as being the right thing to do. It's just about him stepping up to the mark, or stepping up to the mantle of having to do it. Like his father says, greatness is thrust upon whatever. You don't step up for greatness.
The Spider-Man dialogue, with great power comes
greatness is
great
thrust upon
responsibility.
people. Yeah, it's basically that. And you say, okay, this is someone who's a little hesitant or wary of taking on power. So that's kind of where it ends, but he's still very clearly a hero. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Dune Part 2 now. Speaking for myself, I was super excited finally getting to see another Denis movie. I know he's been working on it for years. And now you've also added Christopher Walken, you've added Austin Butler, you added Leah Seydoux, and you added the queen of my heart and my life, Florence Pugh.
Yeah,
I
she's
will
awesome.
ride or die for Florence Pugh anywhere, anytime, right? So I was fully in. What about you? What was your kind of excitement level coming into Dune 2?
I would say my excitement was tempered, not because I didn't enjoy Dune 1 so much, but I don't know. Maybe I was just in a space where I wasn't really looking forward to a movie, but I don't know. Like, I know people were losing it. One of my quizzer friends only, he just loves Dune 1. He's been like canvassing it for like ever. Subco, he's like showing it to everyone. So yeah, well, obviously I want to see a new movie, and a new Delhi movie is always an event. But I was like, yeah, I
Yeah,
really want
yeah,
to see it. And I mean, I knew it's going to be good, so it's not like you're not waiting for something. It's like, at least that's where Nolan has something over Denny, right? Like, because it's the amount is guarded, you actually don't know what you're going to expect at all.
yeah,
But
fair
like, we
enough.
kind of know where Dune was leading to, and okay, yeah, it's going to be, yeah, they're going to bring their A game, they're going to do a great job, so you're not really surprised. So,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, so I was looking forward
that's
to
a
it, but
fair point.
I wasn't so excited, I would say.
Huh. Huh. For me, I was like all in, always happy to see Denny. And then I could see that they were also, if you saw the promotional material towards the end, everybody was talking a lot about Denny. I think one of the things that happened with the Oscars in for Dune, the first one, is that I think they got 10 nominations. They won six below the line, but Denny himself was not nominated, even though it was nominated
Oh,
for Best
really?
Picture.
He wasn't
Denny was
nominated?
not
Oh,
nominated.
oh,
Yeah.
wow, that's
So I
crazy.
think there was a very careful PR push to say Denny is the author, Denny is the man. Like you,
Nice.
if you see the last 1 month of PR around, last couple of weeks of PR around Dune Part 2, you would see a lot of them talking about this is Denny's vision, this is Denny's vision. Like there was like a good amount of,
Oh.
and anyway, they'll come back towards the end of the year once they start doing Oscar campaign. Uh, and of course, again, it'll get nominated at least like 10. Denny, like we spoke about, technically very proficient. So below the
Yeah,
line, he'll just like
all of it,
have a
yeah.
bunch of knowing now, without getting into spoilers, that there will be a Dune 3 at the very least.
Oh, is it
I
greenlit
think
already?
that
I thought it's not
it's
like.
not greenlit, but there's no way they're not greenlighting now, right?
Of course, yeah.
With the success compared to
Yeah.
one which came in that muted time and didn't really have a box office, because also part of one, if you remember, was part of when HBO Max said we'll
Oh
put all our
yeah, yeah,
movies
yeah. Oh
as
yeah, yeah, yeah,
streamer,
yeah.
so it had a lot of issues. Um, so this two is clearly done well and is doing well. So I think knowing that three is going to come might again he'll get nominated this year for director next year. I mean, but I doubt he or Dune specifically will win. I think they'll get below the lines and it will be left for
Dune
Chalo,
3.
Return of the King. Dune 3 mein
I
kar
was
lenge.
about to say, yeah, I was about to say that
He's
only.
going to
It's
get the Return
probably
of the King is going to happen to him. But he also said he's going to take a break between two and three. So I think the question will be, what does he announce after and say that he's going to.
it's got to be Rendezvous Drama, man. It's got to be that. Like, come on, like I want a new contact film from Denny because his first contact film was so amazing. And
Yeah.
yeah, like he's the new. I would say he's like the new. It's going to be the new 2001 Space Odyssey, right? So I'm hoping for the Kubrickian. Like he should be
Yeah.
in that status after this. I hope, but let's see.
But if it is like a Rendezvous with Rama, then that's 3 years plus another 3 years for
Uh,
Dune 3. Which anyway, he wants a gap, and anyway, he takes at least 2 years. So either way, Dune 3 is 4, if not 6 years away. At the very least, 4 years
wow,
away. At the most, 6 years away is what I expect.
wow,
At
that's a
least two
lot.
years he'll take, potentially a third. He's never come with back-to-back movies. He's always taken at least 2 years in the middle.
Right.
So he's very slow and methodical and careful about everything he builds.
So yeah, Dune 2 begins pretty much where Dune 1 ended, where we see Paul Atreides now a kind of a part of the Freemen, but not really like he hasn't been completely assimilated with their culture, so he's still looked at as an outsider. And side by side, we see that now the Harkonnens who carried out the attack on the Atreides are now ruling over Arrakis, and they're trying to mine spice, but they're not doing great because the Freemen, along with Paul, keep doing these kind of surprise attacks onto the Harkonnens, right? So Harkonnens are kind of under pressure to make things happen, and there's this kind of skirmishes that keep happening. So that's where we are at for pretty much all of the movie, and then kind of you see that Paul getting more and more included into the Fremen world, the Fremen life. Of course, we have a lot more of Zendaya's character, and she gets romantically involved with Paul, who's played by Timothy Chalamet again. I mean, I should just take one diversion. The actors are just amazing in the Dune. I think that really sells the story so well.
Yeah,
Everyone's done a splendid job, like even minor characters.
yeah,
I mean, yeah, Batista also has done a great job, and he raves so much about how nice Denny is, and kind of seeing this
yeah,
potential in him. So you can see this Denny bringing out the best, and everyone wants to do their best for a movie like Dune, which is like let's face it,
yeah,
it's kind of a superhero movie, in some ways. Um,
yeah.
so yeah, well, and so we see slowly, Paul is getting more and more popular amongst the women, and there's obviously the foreboding presence of his mother, who's played by Lady Jessica, and we said that she's obviously a Bene Gesserit, a fairly powerful Bene Gesserit sister, which means that she knows a lot about traditions, and the Bene Gesserit have been spreading a lot of lore and trying to kind of always be adjacent to the power throughout the universe. So Lady Jessica is very well versed, very scheming, very, very intelligent. And what she wants is she wants Paul, her son, to be at the top of it all. So she's kind of, really spreading the rumor of this one savior who's called Lisan Al-Gaib, which I'm sure we're going to hear a
Lisan
lot about.
Al-Gaib.
Lisan Al-Gaib. Those memes are the best memes, the memes I'm seeing
Yeah,
from Javier Bardem.
yeah,
So yeah, she's been spreading the rumor of a Lisan Al-Gaib, which is the savior of them all, who's going to come and kind of, emancipate the Fremen, and Fremen are going to get their due place in Arrakis as it was many, many centuries ago. And that's where we are at. And yeah, that's pretty much the plot. And of course, there's the ending, which I'm not sure if you want to touch upon yet, but this is pretty much
we'll
the
get to that.
movie. Yeah. So this is
Yeah,
pretty much how Dune 2 progresses.
there's this whole prophecy that's being spread among the people, and I think the movie does a good job of delineating between what sounds like prophecy but is really just storytelling,
Yeah.
right? This is just if you tell people something 100 times, it will sound like it's a prophecy. They really break down what prophecy and where it comes from in that
Right.
sense. And he's very clear. Paul is very clear that every time she says you're part of the prophecy, he says no, you are just making a story, and you've told these
Yeah.
people that story 100 times, and they are desperate and they need something, so they'll believe anything. I think we also start seeing a little bit of the emperor and other spaces. We start seeing the Emperor and his daughter, played by Florence Pugh. This is where I started feeling the movie lag a little bit. Like everything that was happening on Arrakis was super fun. I really enjoyed the structure because they were long stretches. So if I had to guess beforehand that, I know that Austin Butler is one of the Harkonnen, he's going to be on that planet. She's Princess Cyrilla and she's going to be with the Emperor, and we've got Arrakis. I would have assumed the story will jump between the three locations to have a lot of cost cutting. But Denis is just like, no, मेरा structure यहाँ है. I'm on Arrakis. We're
Right.
gonna do like an hour of Arrakis. Then you'll see 5 minutes of these guys, 5 minutes of those guys, and they'll all land up. But I'm doing what's right for the story. I'm not just dividing shit up for the sake of doing it. Right? I kept waiting for when are we going to see anything about Austin Butler comes like a
Much
good
later.
like
Yeah.
hour and a half into the movie. You don't even see him. At least Florence Pugh we see a little bit. But even then, whenever they come to Arrakis, they're there for like a good like 30, 40 minutes.
Yeah.
It's not like 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there. Normally, what you would think, like if you thought of Lord of the Rings or even Star Wars, they keep jumping the story in multiple places. They keep moving locations to show everybody else.
Yeah.
He's very clear. My story is here between Paul and Chani. This is the story I need to tell. And I think it helps because you need that love story to set in, that relationship to set in for the ending to have the impact this has, right?
Yep.
That cannot work if you give this short shift, if you don't like really settle this in. So I think he takes the time to do that. Coming to Florence Pugh, the thing that didn't work for me, and I think it's part of him having to give something to Florence Pugh, I don't know what, but this time, and everything we said about one, in terms of exposition, this time it becomes a lot more exposition. I wonder if it was needed. There are a lot of things that Florence Pugh does in her
Reading.
Captain Picard star date log entry, whatever,
Yeah.
Star Trek kind of. You're anyway seeing it there. Paul has become a hero. Somebody's become a hero. There's a new prophet coming up. She starts like kind of doing a little bit of exposition. So I felt like this time maybe it was the need to give her something to do. I don't know what it was, or maybe he thought a lot of people have not seen one,
Right.
so you're trying to give them some explanation to get them in. Otherwise, like for a person who's seen one, you could completely cut out all of her diary scenes, and the movie makes just as much sense. You don't really need a lot of the diary stuff.
Yeah, I feel like I think it served two purposes. Actually, honestly I did not feel like it lagged a lot. I think I was listening to some people and they were saying that Christopher Walken's character he didn't seem like he was acting. He was just like he didn't seem into the Dune thing. He was just transported there. But actually, I didn't feel any of that. I thought
That's fine.
both Christopher Walken and Florence Pugh. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you what my reading
Yeah,
of
good.
Florence Pugh's character was. I feel like I think she's an historian in the books, if I'm not mistaken. Like she's obviously trained with the Bene Gesserit, but
Okay.
she's a historian. So there was that
Yeah.
aspect of her kind of writing history and learning history. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, I think they wanted to show that the news of the legend of Lisan Al-Gaib is actually traveling to other places as well. So I think that's probably why, because
Fair enough.
the legend of Lisan Al-Gaib would not come to her by a scroll, right? It wouldn't be like a decree sent by a king
Yeah.
that there is a Lisan Al-Gaib. She had to hear it from somewhere. So that whole aspect I thought
Yes.
was but yeah, I thought it was a really
fair.
interesting.
That's a
I
good
felt,
point. I think
yeah,
that is it.
yeah, yeah. I felt like the diversion was quite interesting, and to me, I actually wanted more words. Like so, well, I mean, it's fine that he's still on Arrakis for longer, but I would love to know what's happening around. Like it's such a massive, the whole
Yeah.
interconnect. I would like to know what the other people are
Yeah.
thinking about it, which I'm guessing it's a difficult thing to do
Yeah.
because they don't have a TV series. He has 3 hours.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
Yeah.
quite liked it. One small geek thing that I noticed is apparently the DP used these kind of wonky lenses to show where the emperor, whenever the first scene where the emperor is talking to Irulan, and actually if you go and notice the background is really blurred, but it's blurred in circles. It's this very weirdly
Okay.
disoriented thing, and apparently it's some very special lenses they made to give this weird thing. And I was waiting for it to happen because I already knew about it before I went to the movie. It was quite cool. Like so you can see he does like he also does things like that, like which is like a
Yeah.
minor thing, but maybe you would have noticed that okay, so the thing is the planet is green, so you might think these are the good guys, but it needed a little bit of an edge to make you know that okay, the emperor
Yeah.
is not good, like otherwise how would you
Yeah.
know that he's not good?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I thought it was really neat
Nice.
that kind of nice touchy day. Of course, with a bigger,
Very
more
nice.
flourishing touch that we'll talk about, which is the
Yeah.
planet of the Harkonnens. But yeah, I think this was
Yeah.
quite
Yeah.
cool.
There are like multiple names that Paul has to take on. Muad'Dib is a name that he takes on as the Desert Mouse. That's a name he takes on.
Yeah.
Uh, Lisan Al-Gaib is kind of the prince who was promised, or the prophet, or the savior who was promised, which he keeps trying to step away from that idea.
Yeah.
And here maybe we can talk a little bit about, we spoke briefly about performances, but I think the truly winning performance in this is our man Javier Bardem as Stilgar, the leader of the Fremens,
The comic
who
relief
just
of
totally
Dune.
believes, because in the first movie he wasn't comic relief. He was
Yeah.
very much like a strong character who could be funny because of the things that he was doing that we didn't understand, like when he spits or whatever.
Yeah.
Because we didn't understand it, played as wry humor. It played off like Bruce Willis and Die Hard kind of funny, where it's not jokes, but it's
Right.
coming out of character and whatever else. Here it's a lot more clearly comic relief, but at the same time it's a very deliberate choice. Like I don't think it's a choice to, because he felt like we needed laughs or whatever. I
Yeah, of
think it was
course.
a choice to show that how blind you can be towards your beliefs,
Yeah.
how wholly you can believe it without coming off as a hardcore flag waving fanatic, right?
Right. Fair enough.
I think
Yeah.
that's what he's trying to show. I think he's trying to say, because if you had shown him as a hardliner believer in the prophecy, then it's difficult to relate to him. And then you'll think, I'm not like that. But I think what he's trying to show is even the most like regular person, there are so many ways to believe in a prophecy that you will completely relate to Stilgar and you like him. But he's also this nut job who believes in this
Yeah.
crazy prophecy, right?
That's a good way
And
to put it,
here,
actually. Yeah, he's a nut job. You're
yeah,
right. I think that's a very nice distinction because I think he's not intelligent in the sense that he's so bought into the philosophy or the prophecy rather of the
yeah,
Lisan Al-Gaib or the savior that he's just delusional at this point, right? Like he's just a
yeah, yeah.
delusional nut job, and
Anything,
it's different from an evil kind of a
yeah,
mongrel. Like that's a different
yes,
character altogether. But Srigar is
yeah.
not that, which is I think a really nice point. Yeah.
Because I think he wants to show, and even to completely sidestep out of this, Barry Jenkins talks about this a lot, where people went to him and said, "You're humanizing like really villainous characters. Say if you've seen Underground Railroad and all of those,"
Okay.
and he says it's not about humanizing them, but you have to show that they can, because even whatever Hitler or whoever, in the rest of their life, they were like a normal person. Now, if I
Right.
showed them as being evil throughout, then it's very easy to say, I'm not like that.
Mm.
But you want people to realize that even everything else I relate to this person, I could also fall into this trap of being a, whatever, hardliner. Or
Yeah,
you
yeah, of
want
course.
to say that the line is very thin. It's not
Right.
as easy as saying, oh, I'm not like that. It's obviously I'm never going to be a hardcore Nazi or whatever. You want to show them as a regular human being so that you can say, it can happen to you also. It can happen to me. Any of us are capable of tremendous evil or crazy
Right.
thoughts or whatever else. Jenkins talks about that a lot, and I think that was part of why Bardem played him this way. Uh, Speaking of Bardem and the memes, I think we should explain some of these memes, and we'll probably link to some of them. But there's this whole idea that Stilgar basically believes in Paul so much that no matter what Paul does, he twists it to fit within. And this is
Yeah.
again a sign of that religious thing, right? When you talk to someone, why is there no God? Then that
Right.
logic is also therefore this is there because there's a God.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
they'll always twist it around to make
Force fitting
force
everything.
fitting. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So he does anything, and like when he says, "I'm not the prophet," and everybody's stunned. Then the next scene, and that's the first big laugh of the movie, is him talking to a bunch of the Fremen and saying, "Look at the humility of Lisan Al-Gaib. He doesn't want to show that he is Lisan Al-Gaib. He's a very
Yeah.
humble guy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
everything is this
Uh,
really uh,
I mean,
staunch belief.
pardon my French, but I think one of the Twitter accounts called him the greatest meat rider in the history of cinema, and I think it's just hilarious that basically yeah, it's just really funny, and he is really like he's like and like all these memes about when somebody's going to find garlic in the kitchen, and it's like listen, I'll
Yeah,
get
exactly.
and
Yeah,
like when a baby suddenly croons into a ear and he just turns back and he's like, oh, listen, I'll get and it's just
yeah,
hilarious. Like it's one of my favorite
everything.
things to come out of the
Yeah,
movie.
yeah.
Dune. Yeah, so funny.
And I wish I had the clip of, there's this one in the climax without giving it away. when the final end happens,
Yeah.
he's in such shock that our hero Paul won over
Paul.
that final thing, and he just jumps up and Lisan Al-Gaib.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
turns
yeah, yeah,
to this.
yeah. He
I
does.
was hoping to find that audio somewhere. I could not. I love that bit, right? Because
Yeah.
everybody thinks Paul's going to lose, and then Paul wins in the end.
Right.
And there's silence for like 2 seconds, and Lisan Al-Gaib.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He's like, yes, okay. Let me remind everyone that
Yeah,
there's
I
a
think
he.
the way you're doing it is exactly how it happened. That's really good play acting, man. That's really impressive.
That's I wish I could find that clip, but it's not yet officially released anywhere. But yeah,
Yeah.
I've been doing that as well at home. Apart from yeah. The other thing I've been doing at home is ever since I watched this, I've come back and I keep picking up my cats and Lisan Al-Gaib.
Yeah, it's replaced what Lion King for you, I guess, where you'll be doing the whole
Yeah,
pride roll thing. Yeah.
correct. But yeah, I think it's a great performance, and I think he should be nominated. It's not easy doing what he does, and he does a really great job
Yeah.
carrying a lot of the movie and carrying the burden of the movie in terms of wanting us to believe in
Right.
Paul. Which brings me to the other person who I thought was really great was Zendaya, and the way her role is written, and the way it shifts in the final third, which will
Yeah,
take
yeah.
us into spoiler territory. So before we go there, let's talk a little bit more about some of the visuals and some of the other things. Why don't you tell us about Gedi Prime and
Oh yeah,
how
yeah.
things work?
Let me geek out a bit about cinematography. One of my complaints about Dune One was that because Arrakis is sand and sand is just flat looking, right? So to me, that's one of the weaknesses. It's not Denis' fault, I guess, but like to me, it lacked color. You know, like for example, if you look at Mad Max Fury Road, that is also sand, but George Miller and the way he did Mad Max Fury Road was so like vibrant and crazy. And I want to talk about the crazy a bit later. But yeah, well, so I thought it lacked that, but he did it really well in Dune 2 because he had all those sunset scenes which were like bright orange. And I thought that
Yeah,
was great. Like it was so
yeah,
cinematic and kind of added a lot more texture and personality to Arrakis itself. And also the fight scenes became so much more amazing. So that was, I thought, a really nice touch.
yeah,
And yeah, of course, the more flourish, the amazing touch was the more obvious touches this planet called KD Prime, which is where the Harkonnens inhabit. And when we actually are introduced to Austin Butler's character, who is basically one of the primary antagonists in Dune 2, he's this kind of deranged, obviously extremely skilled, extremely intelligent, but also basically psychopathic person. Um,
he's psychotic,
He's
as
psychotic, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Florence Pugh.
yeah.
Yeah,
So we are introduced to Gary Prime in which is what a kind of gladiator-like scene where Austin Butler's character has to fight some random dude who we learn is apparently related to Atreides. But anyways, that's irrelevant. But what we see about Gary Prime is that it's entirely black and white. Okay,
yeah,
and we don't know this, but this is apparently because of the sun on Gary Prime actually is made that way so that the entire world is indeed black and white, which is
yeah,
a really cool thing. And the way they did it is apparently they used some infrared lenses. So it's not only black and white, it's actually some kind of a different black and white which renders and makes skin a
yeah,
lot more translucent and this kind of thing. And actually, if you look at the movie, it really gives it a weird gloss and it makes the
yeah,
whole planet look eerie almost, which is great because Harkonnens are
yeah.
kind of, very,
Exactly
very,
what you want.
yeah, the embodiment of evil. So I thought that was so cool, and obviously
Yeah,
big props to the DP and the whole team. But just
yeah,
the way it was executed
yeah.
was really
And
masterful. But yeah, like,
great.
and obviously at this point, we should also mention that I think Stellan Skarsgård was really good, man. Like I thought, like this kind of big, barren, kind of, purely evil dude who's just like, I don't know, but he just plays it with it's this quiet intensity, but it's because of the physical
Yeah,
nature of his body.
yeah.
It's also a very physical intensity, and I thought
Physicality.
I thought it was quite
Yeah,
brilliant actually.
yeah.
Before we leave Gary Prime, I think you will appreciate this. So I was watching this Dolby video where they were talking about how they created the sound on Gary Prime, and it turns out that
Huh,
the Harkonnens don't have like they don't chant actually. They have like only stomping and guttural growls. So actually, the way the
huh.
stadium was cheering was not like
Ooh,
by. So they actually went to like some rock bands and they saw the way they growl and they thump and they foot tap
huh.
and they recorded that. So they went to all,
Nice.
so that's how they did it.
Oh,
So it's kind of
very nice.
imagine. Can you imagine like that
Yeah.
kind of detail? So it's so cool.
Before we get into spoilers, the last thing I want to talk about is the sandworm sequence. This is when Paul has to prove himself finally by riding a sandworm. But this is like the visual highlight of the movie, in my opinion, apart from the Gedi Prime that you were talking about, that one sequence. And I think the sandworm riding, the first sandworm ride, is the main sequence of the movie in terms of Paisa Vasool,
Yeah,
visuals. And Paul calls this a really huge sandworm that comes. For me, like, first is he takes a lot of time. He falls through that sand dune to get onto the sandworm, and he's in darkness, and it's just like a lot of sound and there's sand flying. He really takes into account that it's not going to be very easy, sleek, elegant, beautiful, right? Even when he's trying to stand up on that sandworm, as they're going through dunes, he's getting like bashed by one after the other. He's getting bashed by larger dunes of sand, and it takes a long time to actually get onto that position. So he really shows you the work that goes into being a rider of the sandworm, and I think that's what makes that sequence work
right.
on one level. It's not that easy, and it's not some you turn on a trick and you are able to do it, but you have to go through this every time. Even the so-called messiah of our world, Paul Atreides, Muad'Dib, alleged Lisan Al-Gaib, doesn't just call a sandworm and then step on it. This is not
Yeah,
as simple as that. The sandworms are doing what they do. Shai Hulud will do what he does. You have to like figure your way and become one with the sandworm, right?
yeah,
Uh, but for me, the sequence also, coming back to something you said all the way in the beginning, this idea of scale, right? If you see the later shots, once he's on the sandworm and it's going, and they show all the shots from the perspective of the Fremen who are watching and cheering, and they realize, oh my God, this guy's actually done it. You can see the sandworm in the distance. You can see one little speck on it, which is
yeah.
supposed to be Paul
Paul.
Atreides. You can see in the foreground, you can see the Fremen who are cheering, and you can tell that, okay, fine, if this our human person is this big and
Yeah,
that human person there's a dot, therefore you can tell what that size is. Like
yeah,
you
yeah.
need the perspective of the foreground to be able to tell what's going on there. If you had
Yeah,
only the shot of the sun,
this is the
you
trick
can't
that
tell.
yeah, this is the trick that Guillermo del Toro used so well in Pacific Rim, right? Because the
Yeah,
kaijus feel huge because he used scale so beautifully compared to other things. It's
yeah,
great.
yeah,
I'll give you a couple of because you're talking about the sandworm scene. I obviously I've been geeking about I'm like clearly a lot of time to spend on geeking about Dune. But he talks about this scene quite a bit, Denny, and he says obviously it was a challenging scene, but he says that they wanted to have some sense of biology of the sandworm. So actually, if you look at it, the way he claws into the sandworm's skin,
yeah,
and the skin opens up. And apparently, when the skin
yeah.
opens up, the sandworms don't want to go inside the sand because the sand will then start irritating them.
It will get
So that's how
so
the
that's why they
sandworm
stay out.
remains exactly. So imagine like that was
Ah,
what they thought about, and also they kept in mind that they don't want any video game like camera movements. So if you, like you put it, like they had one POV of the Fremen, they had one POV, which is how the camera could move physically. So it's not like this kind of
yeah,
Zack
yeah,
Snyder weird like fast zooms and pullouts
yeah,
and
yeah,
none of that. So
yeah, yeah,
I mean that's a hallmark of how Denny does visual effects in general. I feel
yeah,
like
yeah.
he does.
So, like we said, Dune 1 ends with Paul being the hero. We are all in on this whole idea that he will save the world. Sure, maybe he has to get into a holy war and a lot of people will die, but this is all a just cause. 2 starts making it clear very quickly, both from a little bit from Paul as well, but also from the others, that this prophecy is something malevolent. It's an evilish thing, and it starts becoming much clearer that even this savior Paul is not necessarily any different from the other imperialist oppressors that they had. They slowly start getting there. He keeps talking about his fears with Zendaya, and Zendaya's Chani. She says that line, right? I will always be with you as long as you are yourself. And she means you are Paul and not Lisan
Listen,
Al-Gaib.
I yeah.
But there's a point in the final act, in the third act, beginning of the third act, where Paul has to do something and ends up realizing that there's no way to do this except to go through with the whole prophecy. He realized that he's on a path that has to end
Yeah.
the way it ends. There's no way to stop this cycle. And he embraces the whole idea of being the Lisan al Gaib, of being this prophet and this leader, and playing that role of the leader. And Zendaya pushes back against the idea of being forced to be a part of this story. She's already pushing back even earlier, saying, "I have a real Fremen name and I don't like it because it's some whatever, it has its own meaning and I don't like that. What I do is what's important. What I do for my people is important. All of these stories are just stories. All of these prophecies are just prophecies. They don't mean anything, right?
Right.
A bit in the north and the south." But she starts pushing back. And the entire final act, actually, especially on my second watch as I was watching, for me, the perspective changed from Paul to Chani. Until then, we were seeing everything from Paul's point of view, and we were empathizing with Paul about, oh no, he has to do this great thing, but it's going to come at a great cost. He's a reluctant hero.
Yeah, yeah.
But once he decides to play the hero, we realize this is not a hero, this is a villain. And then for me, the perspective shifts to Chani, who is watching from a distance. And my wife pointed this out. It's also in the final one third. One is his costume changes, it becomes black.
Oh, right. Wow.
From the thing, it becomes dark. He's wearing that long cloak and he's walking in
Right.
front of the sandworm and all that. It
Yeah.
becomes dark. Suddenly, the shots are much further away. You're seeing him as this iconic figure in the
Right.
distance, as opposed to up close. If you see the first half, everything's on his face. He's a human
Right.
person, but now he's suddenly become this really big leader or whatever, and he's now distanced and he's no longer human. Why don't you tell us what happens in the end and what did you think about it?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, like as Naren, as you so nicely put it, basically we see Paul kind of reluctantly choosing the path that leads to this big battle, and the Emperor sort of descends on the on Arrakis, and the Harkonnens are already there, and basically it leads to proper warfare, which is Paul leading his Fremen troops. There's a lot of planning, and of course, like you should see the movie to see why he chooses to kind of go down this path. It's kind of explained, but well, all that matters is he does choose to go to the south where all the
Mm.
radicals are who believe in the Lisan Al-Gaib, kind of
Yeah.
like get the whole army together that we are going to fight this war, and then obviously they have the sandworms, which the enemy, quote unquote enemy armies are no match for, and soon they are able to kind of capture the emperor and make them prisoners. And it all boils down to, in the end, a one-on-one, mano a mano battle between
Yeah.
Austin Butler's character and Paul's character, where it's like whoever wins this battle will basically be the one. Okay, and a small thing to note here is that Austin Butler's character
Yeah.
is also one of the people that Bene Gesserit have been betting on for a long time,
Grouping.
to kind of to become the big one. So it's almost like two of kind of polar personality characters clashing together. And Denny actually even picks it that way
Yeah.
because they're both so different looking. That's the first thing. And the way he shoots that,
Mm.
it's so minimal. So it's just a fight scene. The movie ends with one fight scene,
Yeah.
essentially. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna give you the spoiler. The fight is basically, well, Paul does win, and it's obviously a really well choreographed fight. A lot of, I guess, Krav Maga and a bunch of mixed martial arts stuff there. And
Yeah.
after Paul wins, it's now a given that he is the leader. But obviously, when all of this has been happening, there has been word that is sent out to the other great founders, and they have all also come down to Arrakis. And meanwhile, they have made the decision that they will not
Yeah.
respect the ascension of Paul. They will not respect his titledom. And Paul is told about
Yeah.
it, and the movie ends with him declaring war on all the houses, which probably, as you
Yeah.
all know well how that goes, is going to lead to massive bloodshed. So that's where we are left with. And of course, the
Yeah.
not the closing shot, but one of the lasting images of the movie is the look of horror on Zendaya's face when she slowly sees Paul descending into this power-hungry,
Yeah.
war-hungry kind of a
Yes.
character. So that's a very
Yeah.
beautiful moving last image to show. So
Yeah.
that's how the movie ends.
By the way, the final image is her face. She has called the sandworm and she's waiting for it to come to get on it to leave.
Oh, right.
The
Yeah,
last,
yeah,
the last one is
yeah,
absolutely her face.
yeah,
Our hero or the protagonist that we've been following is not a hero. I'm
yeah,
ending on her face to tell you that what is happening is wrong. What is happening is this person has gone down, is actually the villain of our story, not the hero. And this is also Herbert's Dune and Dune Messiah all were pushing in this direction. Apparently, Herbert originally didn't have a plan to write Dune Messiah. He'd only written whatever first, second, how many ever they were. He realized that people were thinking of Paul as a hero. And he said, okay, fine, I have to write one very explicit one. And that's when Dune Messiah came out, where he had to show that, but his intention was always to show Paul. And I think uh, Denny does it well. And he says, all respect to Herbert, I followed his writing. But I felt because I have a visual medium, I can do things a little more obviously.
Right.
And so that choice to end on Zendaya, when the movie's called Dune, when it's all about Lisan Al-Gaib, it's all about Paul, he's the hero, you end on her face saying, sorry, I don't approve of what is happening here. This is wrong. You end on that, and there's no way to come out of this movie saying Paul's the hero. I
Yeah.
think the choice to end on her instead of him. You could have easily ended on a shot of him standing on that balcony looking out and being a little conflicted, but that
Yeah.
still empathizes him and says,
Exactly.
poor guy, he's put in this situation. But if you show it from Zendaya's perspective, she's like, screw you. You're not a prophet. You're not any savior. You're just using our people to do what you need to do, which is your revenge and your whatever else. You're clouding it under this, cloaking it under this idea of a holy war. But you're not that. There's nothing here that is right or ethical or correct. And
Yeah,
she heads off.
it also lays the groundwork of Dune Messiah really well, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
we're hopefully going to see more of the story from Zendaya's POV, I think, and she's so fantastic. I mean, well, I
yeah,
mean, she brings so much to this character in like this big budget movie. It's so easy to just flatly play it. You can see most of the
yeah,
Marvel movies, people are just like kind of hamming their way through and just like floating through the
yeah,
but
yeah,
it's brilliant to see like people biting into the path and actually like taking it seriously. It's so good to like see that, and it's amazing. Yeah,
yeah. And that ending only works the way it does because we've seen so much of them building that relationship. Because in the
yeah,
movie one, we've only seen like snippets of some fantasy that he has.
yeah,
We never seeing her as a person. This second movie, you needed those long stretches of them falling in love, action sequence with both of them trying to bring down that mine
yeah.
machine. Which, by the way, again, perfect example of scale. Two
Yeah.
small bodies under one huge leg, which is the leg is a part of a huge this thing, but all you
Yeah,
can see is two small bodies in one shadow.
yeah.
Based on that, you go like three steps. This into 100 is the leg, into 1 million is the
Yeah,
big.
it's
So,
it's simple, right? Like back in one of my ancient lives when I used to do some science writing, my editor used to always say, every time you write something that oh this is big, you'll be like, what does that mean? And then you would write, okay, it's
yeah,
basically how fast is the Peregrine Falcon? It's as fast as an F1 car. Because just putting
ah,
300 kilometers per hour doesn't give you a sense of it, right? But
yeah, yeah.
you feel how fast a F1 car is. So now you
F1
know how
car can.
fast. So I think that's pretty
Exactly.
much it's a very basic concept of how our brains perceive dimensions, right?
Yes.
Like, and
Yeah.
it's great. Like, it's a very nice thing how he does it.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's the end of Dune. I thought wonderful choice to end on her. It's
Beautiful.
a
Yeah.
much more like straightforward way to say sorry and forget white savior or whatever. Just the idea that there's a prophet and people will get, swayed into believing and going off on this journey or holy war or whatever it is. I think lots of parallels to current scenes everywhere in
Yeah.
multiple different countries, including our own India as well.
If I may,
Yeah.
I have like one point to add. I mean, as a criticism, I think. Um, so I'm not sure if the listeners have heard of this, but there's so Dune obviously is an old book, right? And there was a Chilean director called Alejandro Jodorowsky who actually wanted to
Yes.
make the movie on Dune, and you can actually go and see this documentary. It's brilliant. It's
Yeah,
directed by
definitely.
Nicholas Winding Refn, who made the Driver, which is a
Yeah,
great
right.
movie. So this is about how this kind of weird avant-garde director wanted to make and adapt Dune. Okay, so he collected, he got like really cool people to do the artwork. He got Geiger, who did the alien
Mm.
artwork, to actually
Yeah,
design
yeah,
the Harkonnens and all that. He got like Pink Floyd to do the music and everything. And there was a massive budget and nobody funded it. They were like, dude, this is just too crazy. And it just never got made. It's this weird pipe dream, which could have potentially changed the landscape of sci-fi movies because you know what got made
mm.
after that? It was Star Wars. So,
Yeah,
but I think Jodorowsky's Dune would have been this kind of psychedelic, kind of crazy, which is also what the book is supposed to be. And I feel
yeah,
like for all of Denis' visual brilliance, it's too serious, too grey, and too muted sometimes. I wish that he took a little more liberty with color and like he
yeah,
did with JD Prime, which was a great
yeah,
thing. I wish he gave
yeah.
us a little more zany. I just wish that. I don't know. but that's just not
Fair
who
enough.
he is. I feel that, but that's the
Yeah,
criticism
fair enough.
of Dune, I guess. Like that's what. Yeah.
Yeah. Good of you to bring that up because the other thing we didn't talk about is David Lynch's Dune, which
Oh yeah,
had
of course.
Paul McLachlan, it had
Yeah.
Sting in the role of
Oh
Frey
yeah, yeah.
Daughter.
Straight out. Yeah,
Sting followed by Elvis now.
yeah. Wow,
But
that is
yeah, I haven't
amazing.
seen that either. But that looks very colorful, by the way. When I look
Yeah,
at pictures and scenes from that movie,
yeah.
I
It's
see a lot of
crazy.
color. But that
Yeah,
was set in that 80s
yeah, yeah.
time when sci-fi was about doing crazy colors just to show that it was not from our time.
Exactly.
Um, but yeah, I haven't seen that movie myself. But yeah, so that was Dune 2. I think the only other thing I want to say is if you go back to Dune 1 and watch one of the early visions that he has of Zendaya, uh, there's one which shows them hugging, and then there's some like it's all like how do you call it, very close up images and just flashes, so you can't really see clearly what's happening. But they're hugging, she kisses him, and then there's some movement, and she steps away, and he takes his hand out, and he looks at his hand, and it's bleeding.
Right.
She's basically killed him or whatever, stabbed him or killed him. I think that's there in the first movie. It's already seeded. We don't
Oh,
pay
okay.
a lot
Wow.
of attention to it back,
Wow.
but I guess that's what's going to come all the way back to
Yeah.
Messiah whenever it happens, 4 to 6 years from now, as we are
So
predicting.
it's like
Uh,
the opposite of Jon Snow killing who's that like
Correct,
dragon lady,
Dennis.
Khaleesi, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, Dennis.
because
Yes, yes.
he was also the prince, or what is he? Is he the one who was the prince who was promised?
Prince who
Jon
was
Snow.
promised.
Yeah, which
Yes,
kind
yes.
of sounds like
Azor
Paul
Ahai.
Atreides.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Correct. Same thing.
yeah.
But yeah, that was so that was our review of Dune 2.
Yeah.
And like both of us said, I think one of our favorite directors, not necessarily one of his best works, but I'll take any Denny over no
Oh
Denny.
yeah, yeah.
So
I mean,
always in.
we didn't mention this too much, but this is how you do a big blockbuster, right?
Yes.
Like, I mean, look at how soulless Marvel movies are compared to this, man. Like, if you want to put some money, I
Yeah.
feel like backing somebody like Denny is, it's obviously, makes so much more sense because you get this, you get like actual
Yeah.
good filmmaking. Whereas you could
Fair
see like
enough.
some nonsensical Captain Marvel or whatever the hell they keep doing there, Black Widow and all that. So,
The newer ones are not good, but I will go to bat for the earlier ones. It's
some
a
of
different
them,
type of storytelling. So
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I think it's it's not trying to do what Dune is trying to do either.
True,
It's
true, but
trying to do something else, and it
I just
works.
mean in the yeah, but in the approach
But yeah,
to visual effects and all,
there's
it's so
definitely a
different.
difference.
It's so nice to see. It's so nice to see a movie like that being made with that kind of care and things like that. So yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, I think we're
yeah,
coming towards the end of the podcast, but I really feel like he's a great director. If you haven't seen his movies, I highly recommend that you go and check them out because like every element of filmmaking is well taken care of. And
yeah.
he really gets me, and you can see that he loves movies as well. So I would highly recommend starting from his earlier movies and getting to Dune if you really want to check out a true auteur of cinema. I think Denis Villeneuve is a good accessible place to start.
So just to close out the review, we have to do this once more. So let's do it.
Yeah. Hans Zimmer's got it, man. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Before we exit, Ronak, why don't you tell us a little bit about your blog?
Yeah.
I'd like people to read what I've been reading on your blog.
Oh, thanks, Naren. Yeah, I've been a little spotty about it, but I used to be a bit of a science trader in a previous lifetime. Also, a little bit of movie reviews and all, but I think so a little busy, and I'm like, maybe I should just write for myself. And I did what everyone was doing, and I started a Substack on my friends' insistence. She's like, you keep recommending things to people. Why don't you just write it down and tell everyone what you're thinking? I'm like, that sounds like a good idea. So it's called random access memory, which yeah, I know has some kind of meaning to music and all, but for me, it just means thinking about random things and just accessing memory randomly. So it's just a bunch of things I like dinosaurs, random science tidbits, stuff about movies, also personal essays about friendship and love and things like that. So if that's your kind of thing, yeah, I hope you check it out. And if people join, probably get me to write a little more than I have been. So Thanks.
No, absolutely. I really enjoyed it and I do want to do write more. And also, can you tell people where they can find you on Twitter? I
Oh
know.
yeah. I mean, so yeah, I'm on Twitter and actually Instagram. I put some photos directly on Instagram and Twitter, both of them at Ronak Gupta, RONAKGUPTA, and A4186, which is my undergrad ID. So it's a
Acha.
relic from those days. So
Great. And we'll put links to those in the show notes as well. Thank you, Ronak. Everybody, please follow Ronak and read his writing. Give him some encouragement so that he can do some more.
thanks. Happy to be geeking out. And really
Yeah.
nice to be a guest of this. So it's really been fun. Thanks for calling me.
Thank you. And for us, as usual, reach out to us at your intermission on Twitter or at Gmail. I've been doing a lot of writing with Hindustan Times about the awards race. I'll put a link to that. I wrote a lot about the Oscars and everything leading up to it. That's about it. We'll be back soon with another episode. We've got something special coming up in a couple of weeks. Nitin will be back. We have another special guest coming in. We'll announce that a little later. But thank you, Ronak, and good to have you on. We'll try and do this again sometime.
Oh yeah, that sounds great.
Bye.
Yeah, cool.